Today we're 3D printing and assembling Officer K's blaster from Blade Runner 2049, and this video will also act as a build guide for how to put this thing together, and you can find links to the free 3D models for the original designer here. This is made by 3D Workbench. Now to begin with, we take these three parts, which are the front, and we assemble them, and this piece is super easy, just presses into the front with a little bit of glue, and then this is harder. It's got a little bit of kind of a clip to it, and then you want to align it to make sure it's perfectly straight. And this will need glue down the entire length in order to put this together properly. So be very, very careful, take your time with it. This is also the hardest part to 3D print as well. Then we'll move to the core of the body. We've got these two halves and two inserts that we'll be putting in. So first of all, we'll glue the inserts in. This will then give us somebody to help orientate everything. We'll put the whole thing together. Do some test fits, I would recommend at this point, to make sure you're all going to be fitting up without any problems, and make sure you clean up all your parts. Then it's a matter of getting this entirely glued up. I'm using relatively slow acting glue here so that I still have time if something goes wrong. And then we're going to clamp this together. And of course, if you want, you can just hold it until the glue sets. Then we'll move back to the front. We have two half pieces that are going to go underneath. And this is quite a guddle. This is where the slow acting glue comes in perfect, because you want to get this all lined up and well glued. And you don't want it to be off center or anything like that. And then we'll head back to the main body, and we have a few pieces to add onto this. So the first one here, we don't need any glue at all. This just simply slides on and goes into that hole. Then we have this piece, which has an angled part that matches. We're going to then glue that up and then put it on. And then we have an additional piece that goes on very similar. And then we've got basically our main body almost entirely done. And we'll be soon attaching our two halves together and getting close to being finished. But we do have a few cosmetic items to add, and these go on the top. The more boxy section goes towards that long pole and towards the front, and then we've got two of them on top. And then I'm also going to add the bit on the bottom as well, which you could add later, but it's quite a tough fit once the entire thing is assembled. Now I've just gone with a good old-fashioned hammer to make sure everything's in there, and give this a test fit first. And then when you're gluing it in, it really does disappear quite a bit in there. And then you are now well secured. And then we move on to an entirely different set of parts. So make sure you do a test fit here. You've got two halves that go in the top, and you want to make sure this all fits nice and snug. Clean anything up you need to, and then add liberal amounts of glue and go ahead and glue this all in. Use some bands or something to apply pressure, because you want this to be very secure once it's entirely glued and solidified. So hopefully it'll feel great in the hand. And now we take the two original halves. We're going to add in a little connector piece here and just glue that in. And then we're ready to start assembling this. So I recommend having at least some sort of clamp here and do a test fit, because this is quite a tight fit and you want to make sure this here is going to go in before you add your glue. And if everything kind of connects up fine, you can then add glue and go ahead and clamp it up. If you don't have a clamp, of course, you can just use your hands to hold it for long enough until the glue is set. And now it's starting to look like the final product. So all we need to do now is add a couple of pieces on, and then we're going to be done. So first of all, we want to test fit this piece, make sure it goes on. You can, it kind of slides onto that keyed section. Now we want to glue it up and then hold it in place until that glue sets. Now we have our final, well, almost final piece, which goes into here, a little connector, but it just sits on the flat surface there. So make sure you have plenty glue, as you want this to be extremely secure. And I would recommend adding some bands to make sure you've got a nice secure connection that's going to add pressure to this section. Of course, this is where you're potentially going to hold it, and the stress is going to be the highest there. So make sure you do a good job. Now we have the two final pieces, which are these little tiny details that go into slots on the top here. Touch of glue and they'll go in fine. And this is the final piece. So the original design here has done an amazing job of designing this, and it goes together very beautifully and it looks excellent. I also have a build on this channel if you want to see a painted version of this, but I'm loving how this thing is printed, assembled, and then goes together.